Now, before we show an example of capturing a benchmark, let's talk about how we should define performance requirements. It's important that we actually capture performance as part of the requirements of the system, rather than expecting performance to simply be sufficient or considering it as an afterthought once we've deployed the system. In order to effectively define performance requirements, they have to include a number of different variables. It's certainly not enough that the customers tell us that the system must be fast, or that pages should load quickly, or even that every page should load in less than a second. There are other things that are important considerations. Here are the things that I think are required in order to define a performance requirement. Firstly, you must determine what the specific request or series of requests are that are being considered. In a web application, this is usually corresponding to a particular URL. Next, you need to know what the response time threshold is. This might be 1 or 2 seconds, for instance. Third, you have to know what the specified load is. It might be the case that an application is certainly able to respond in less than a second when there is only a single user, but that it falls down very quickly when it has maybe 5 users. So it's important to know what the load requirements are for the performance requirement. Similarly, you need to know what the set of application characteristics are. Now, by this I mean, what are the levels of data that are currently in use by the application? Let's say that you are running a store application and you have in your test data 2 products and 1 customer. But in the actual production environment, you're going to have 10,000 products and 100,000 customers. You might get a different set of performance results when you run with one set of data versus the other. And so it's important that your performance requirements specify what the application's characteristics are in terms of the actual data sets that are expected to be used. And finally, you need to also determine what the specific resource constraints are, if any. This refers to things like shared resources, perhaps a database server, and what the acceptable load on these resources are. It might be that your system is able to meet all of the performance requirements, but that to do so it uses 100% of the CPU of a shared database server that's also supposed to be available for other applications. Obviously, this might not be an acceptable option, and so it's important that the requirements say, for instance, that this particular test or this particular application should use no more than 25% of the CPU of the shared database server while still meeting all the other requirements listed here. Here's an example performance requirement using the system that I've just outlined. You might say that the search page should respond to a search request for a random term that exists in the article database. This provides us with enough information to write our test. Then we could say that the search page response time must be within 2000 milliseconds, and that this should occur with a load of 10 requests per second on this particular URL and no other requests occurring on the system at this time. Now we also want to specify the data, the application characteristics, and in this case we're going to say that we have an article catalog with 10,000 articles, each with 2,000 words. And then lastly, our system constraint is that we want to have database CPU utilization less than 20% and web CPU utilization less than 10%. Of course, the latter one, the web CPU, is because we probably have other pages on our site other than the search page, and so if the search page was completely using up our web CPU, we wouldn't be able to use our web server for much else.